God have mercy on us all.
Did I screw that up?
And you can get Listen Up for only $14.99.
Introduce your friend.
So this is my friend Vipin. Vipin and I have known each other for a number of years now. We met each other through the Texas Methodist Foundation and some of the facilitation that Vipin has done with them, and then with the lock leaders. As I've gotten to know you, I thought it'd be really interesting for us just to be in a dialogue with you about kind of the ever-changing kind of landscape of polarization often, and the polarization that happens within our own. I think what we're seeing in the world may be really how each of us are feeling interpersonally, and that the answer won't come from without. Often it comes from within and between.
Yeah.
And as you and I have talked about that, that's been really helpful in some of the conversations that we have had. Vipin was just here at Chapelwood and helped co-teach the crossing this weekend.
Oh, nice.
And so it was just beautiful to share you with the Chapelwood community here. And and so I just you have something that you have put together to help communities like Chapelwood and other people, in both personal and business and religious organizations, called the Togetherness Practice. And I thought that as we kind of head into the rest of this week, and as this podcast will drop probably on Friday, and we still may not know, in terms of, whatever we know, we'll know that people will be left, there'll be close to 50% of people angry and afraid, right? No matter, and so I'm just wondering, partly what are the ways that we can begin to head in the direction of togetherness? How do we do that? All those kinds of things. And then John is always brilliant in asking questions and stirring the pot.
Once we get done with this, then whenever we have smart people who know like human behavior, I just use it as my own personal therapy session. So if we get somewhere where I feel like it's going to benefit me today, I'll jump in.
You'll jump in, okay.
But other than that,
all right.
Thanks, Matt. What comes up for me just hearing in the question is an invitation to broaden or reframe slightly the question itself.
Yeah.
So there was this invitation to change the experience of fear or uncertainty or anxiety. But what I would offer is a perspective of, instead of trying to change something, to be with it. Learning to breathe, to slow down and notice, it's 3:10 p.m. in EST and I don't know where the election is going to, what the results will be. Will it be the preferences which I have? Will it be preferences which I don't want to have vis-a-vis my own political leanings? There is this culture of fear, which some of it feels to me like amplified by the media industry, and how much of that is reality and how much of that is actually the reality of the ground. So when there is so much uncertainty that is happening, so if you notice, to take a breath, to slow down. So that's step number one. Slow down, take a breath, just sense into your heart sense, I'm just noticed being anxiety is here right now. So instead of trying to change that, to give it a breath and saying, can I be with this anxiety? Because that is the intelligence of the body sharing and communicating with us something. If fear arises, can I be with this fear for one breath, or for 2 breaths, or for even 3 breaths? So just to let the experience of this reality of this moment be what it is, instead of trying to change it, to fix it, to control it, to manipulate it. And so that's what comes up for me as just like the first step, to slow down, to take a breath. Sometimes it really helps if it's hard for you to sit inside a room with the constant chatter of social media or television, to find that pause, to go for a walk. To be with nature. Nature helps regulate our own nervous systems, right? So I found it really helpful once in a while to go have a really long conversation with trees. They're really good listeners. And I know that can come across as California hippie nonsense, but what I am pointing
Just a little.
is just to be in relationship with life in all its grandeur.
Yes.
All of God's creations and not just human creations, and the wisdom and the comfort that it can offer us.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think that's really helpful as I have kind of increased the amount I've been outside the last week as a function of my own kind of spiritual practice and mental health kind of attunement. In some ways I've spent more time with my dogs than I am with other people. There's just some like little adjustments I'm making, that are saying, oh, wait a minute, how do I tend to these things? What does it mean to be with your fear? Like, why is that does that make sense? I was thinking that of a quote of something I read from Charles Darwin, who says that human beings are the only species that when they feel lost, they increase their speed. Right? And so what I hear you saying is that like what we need to do is actually counterintuitive. There's what you've often talked in our discussions and other places I've been with you, this kind of sacred pause, right, is important. Why is that? Like, why can't we outrun this? Why can't I outperform it?
Well, we've been trying to outrun it for a really long time, and guess what? Where that has God led us. We seem to be outrunning it or trying to control it with pharmaceutical spills or substances, and that has created the situation much more worse than it was originally. But may I, in this moment, a way to answer this question is to channel someone who's slightly way more smarter than me. Was this Persian poet called Rumi, who wrote this poem called The Guest House. You can look it up online, but he says something about this being human as a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. And he goes on, but I'll just want to point out that last two lines of the poem, which he says, the dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Each emotion, each fear, each anxiety, we can look at them from the perspective of, oh, God or spirit or nature or sacred, whatever you want to. There is an invitation for me to learn something from here. Yes. So you can turn to them with laughter. You can turn to them as a guest to say, what are you here to teach me? And what that does is build an intimacy with not just with the fear or the anxiety that's arising, but an intimacy with yourself, in your own relationship with yourself. So we talk about this idea of togetherness. Yes, we all yearn for a deeper sense of belonging and connection with human beings, but togetherness begins in your own relationship with yourself. Yes. So the more we are able to, all of us are able to build that sense of intimacy, to slow down and connect, to be with what is right now, it just unfolds into a greater mystery. So that's one way I like to orient towards that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. It's interesting to me. So we're a part of a denomination, the United Methodists, who've just gone through a massive split. And I feel like that part of what we, particularly in our church here and really under kind of John's leadership and really just the DNA of this place is that I think there's a call to say, hey, wait a minute. All this splitting has not been helpful. How do we come back together, or what is the core? Because it feels like in some ways is that our culture has put us into a fun house where there's these kind of crazy mirrors where we're not able to observe each other as we are, but as we project the other to be. Right? And so whatever that other side is, if it's the other types of Methodists that I disagree with, or the other types of political orientations, or whatever those things are, is that it seems as if we have been ushered into a fun house where we're not being able to see each other anymore. Yeah. Right? The intimacy that you talk about. Yeah. Right? Because there's all these other perceptions that are in the way, and possibly our own fears.
And again, there's no simple answer for this, but a couple of things that comes up for me is it's the distinction between spiritual intelligence and spiritual experience. It's one thing to go to a church and, listen to the pastor talk about love thy neighbor as you love yourself. Sure, that's one of my favorite teachings from the Bible. But what happens to that belief? What happens to your love of Jesus when you realize your neighbor, whom you are supposed to love according to the Bible, you discover that he or she doesn't have the same political or religious or orientation than you do. So that's where it gets so fascinating between human beings. It's easy to be with people who are like us, but I believe that the true power of Christ, that the living Christ, living the teachings of Christ, comes when what happens when you have to get out of your comfort zone and practice the muscle of curiosity to get to know someone who disagrees with you and to discover how Christ consciousness lives in that person. So in a larger way, when I work with pastors, I say the distinction between how is your relationship with Jesus evolving from Jesus the God to Jesus the teacher to Jesus the friend to discovering Christ consciousness within yourself. But when you discover that part, that last leap, which is a momentous leap in identity, self-identity of who I take myself to be, when I get in closer in touch with that, I recognize that's also what John is. That's also what Matt is. That's also was the person who just walked in and kept something on your table, which I don't know what it is, but I see that it's something John is chilling with. So when you have that recognition,
we multitask.
It really doesn't matter if you vote for Trump or Biden or where you stand on abortion. It does matter, but it doesn't become the only thing that matters.
Yeah.
That's the shift in identity, to recognize, how I practice my religion, practice and use this opportunity to connect with someone who fundamentally disagrees with everything I deeply believe in as an opportunity to practice my love of Christ.
Right.
So
one way to think about it. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's one way to practice your faith, which feels so much more joyful and challenging, of course.
Yes.
Now I may be totally off the ranch here because you guys are really smart talking about this stuff. But when you were talking, it makes me think about a guy who wrote a book called Knowledge and Action. His name was Chris Argyris, and he talks about how we learn. And that you can either learn when you have a match or a mismatch in what you intend, and it either happens or it doesn't happen. Okay. But one of the things he says that as you're working through things in life, that we human beings are always operating out of a defensive position. We're trying to protect ourselves from shame and embarrassment or failure or whatever, right? And so what he says is that this requires that we communicate inconsistent messages, but act as if we are not communicating inconsistent messages. And so what he says is we operate at there's like a model one is like one-dimensional. Like I come to you, I advocate my position, I tell you what I think, but I'm not really listening to you. I just have my stuff.
Yeah.
And then model two, when you really break through, he says, is when you can converse with someone, but you can actually have your own views questioned. You can have your own thoughts brought back to you and say, well, have you thought about this? And one of the things ultimately he says is like, we all think we are operating in model two, but we're all really most of us are operating model one. We like to think that we're more enlightened than we really are. We like to think that we're open-minded, but we really aren't. We like to think that it doesn't really matter who wins the election, but we really do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, I just wonder how much of what we do on a daily basis is like a defensive routine.
Yeah.
To protect ourselves from, whatever. I guess the threat could be different for each person, depending on where they are and what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
But when you were talking earlier, it was like, it just kind of made me think of that because I think a lot of us think that we are more enlightened than we really are. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm guilty of that too.
Oh, you are.
Yes, I am. I don't know if what I shared made any, but that's exactly where I went when he started talking. Was that understanding of kind of how we live in these different places. So as I think about, like, you know, when we're recording this, today's election day, we don't know what's going to happen, but I know that, you know, people are not going to be as open and loving and receptive and as they would want to be. They would hope that they would be.
Sure.
And why? Because they're scared, or they're afraid, or they're angry, or they're, I don't know. I just always think about, what is it that's going on in people's lives that's limiting them, that we may not be aware of?
Yeah. Yeah, what that makes me think about, John, is just like there are two things that comes up. One is where just being consciously aware of where am I, in this case, Vipin, bullshitting himself. How am I not, you know, there's one thing to preach. It's a very different thing to practice, right? So I'll say something that came up yesterday. I was in Houston and I was working with a group of men, all Texan, all, you know, Texan accent. And here I am coming from the East Coast. I haven't had only been to Houston twice in my life. And I noticed one of the ways I work with people is I start with the pausing. And I didn't do a pausing or a meditation till at least 10, 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And in a conversation I realized that I was carrying a story or a bias or a judgment about this group of extraordinarily beautiful human beings. Oh, these are Texan men, and they don't care about this mindfulness stuff, right? Like, they will think that's all bullshit. But that was just a story I had based on cultural media, whatever I inhabit. But when I shared that with the group, what they really wanted was the practice of slowing down. But what came in the way of my own assumptions and biases I had about people, right? And that it requires a quality of courage to say, I'm sorry. That was just a story. Is that really true for me? True about yourself, right? So, and when you see the larger political environment about we live in these days, is that capacity to challenge your own stories and your own belief systems to say, is this really true of you? Are you just, you know, you might vote for Trump or you might vote for Biden, but you're also a parent and you like going to the YMCA, and so do I. Like, the things which makes us human, the things which we share as a shared humanity is way much more than the things which divides us. But I just appreciated the perspective you brought in, which is to say, it's one thing to talk about this, but also, how am I practicing this in my daily life? How are we practicing this in our daily life?
Yeah, so what Ardris says is that model one, when we operate strategies of defensiveness, misunderstanding, but it's also, we want a self-fulfillment of what it is we already bring to the table. We want an affirmation of what we already think. And so model one is like, I already know what I bring. I already know, like testing assumptions.
Yes.
So if you come in, you know, I do the same thing. I walk into a group of Texans and I have assumptions that I make about. But then he says in model two, we're looking for people to kind of push back a little bit and not just like reaffirm, but kind of create space that will interrupt our defensive routines. And we're open to that. Yeah. And you did that on your own when you met with these guys. You got there, but it was probably in real time. You're processing this as you're going through. You start with the certain assumptions, but then you get to a place and say, hey, I recognize that I started with some assumptions that I need to test. And I think that's always good for people. One of the things I've learned too, as we talked about, you know, the political landscape or whatever else, is that there is not just one type of person who's a Republican or one type of person who's a Democrat. People are very complex. Yeah. And there's depth and there's nuance. And you'd be surprised that somebody who holds a Republican, traditionally conservative view in one thing might have a very liberal Democratic view on another thing. Yeah. And I don't know how we have a hard time in our culture with nuance and complexity and embracing the beauty of it, man. Yeah. It's like the whole move now is to like either go back to a day when we didn't have to deal with those
Yes.
things. Or
Well, I also wonder if the only place that you can deal with complexity is inside of relationship. Because outside of relationship, you create charts and graphs about what side you're on. But inside a relationship, when you fall in love, when you think about offering your neighbor some sugar or you whatever, those kind of, when you're showing up and you're feeding part of the neighborhood that might not have food, like all of that stuff inside of relationships can hold in a vast amount of complexity, right? But outside of it, it's us, them, right, wrong, damned, saved. We create categories.
Yeah.
But inside, we're all damned and we're all saved and we're all fearful and we're all full of compassion. I don't know.
Right. And, so this was my first trip to Chapelwood on Saturday. And one of the things which really touched me about the experience of it was consistently on your walls, with the people who were saying on your messaging, you kept reinforcing one core message: all are welcome.
Yes.
And why, I'll tell you why that is important. Yes, philosophically, yes, that's great. We need that. But that's an answer, Matt, to what you just pointed out. When you consistently bring human beings together, they get an opportunity to meet and connect with people who are different from them. That helps with helping people to be more open to understanding the complexity of relationship. It challenges the idea, this person is white and in Texas, so he fits in this box. Or this guy is brown and he comes from a different country, he fits into this box. It's a natural human capacity to put people into compartments. But when you bring people together, when there is this consistent opportunity to connect and meaningfully and authentically connect, like what we played with the crossing, it challenges those boxes we put ourselves in.
Yes.
And that goes back, John, to what you were pointing to, what the author you were citing, what we connect with in the togetherness practice is the capacity of perspective taking. Can I hold my perspectives or my beliefs slightly so I can be open to understanding, why do you believe in this perspective? What makes you tick? Why is this so important to you? And that gives us an opportunity to expand. So it's almost like any good friendships helps you to understand and get to know more about what is it that you don't know. What is it that we don't know? And that's when you get an opportunity to grow into and have more connection with each other.
So he's quoting Peter Senge without well, he probably does realize it, but when he says the only way you can break that framework, when you make these leaps of abstraction, you're taking general principles and you're constructing a reality, like these white men from Texas in this big church, right? And he says you have to break that. You have to test the assumptions. And one of the ways you do it is in community. He said you have to have ruthlessly compassionate truth tellers who walk alongside of you, who are ruthlessly compassionate, but also ruthlessly honest. We use that a lot here because I just steal the mess out of Peter Senge. But I mean, it's what I like about the ruthlessly compassionate truth teller is you're not doing that alone. You don't figure that out on your own.
That's right.
Right? The only way you break out of the assumptions and the leaps of abstraction that you make about people and situations is you got to have some partner, some group, somebody walking alongside of you who loves you beyond anything and will be honest with you. Because most people will be honest with you, but they don't really love you. Or some people really, really love you, but they can't find the capacity to be honest with you. So I think when you're looking for those kinds of relationships that really help you, like you're saying, that help you see yourself honestly, you're going to receive it from someone a lot better if you know they ruthlessly love you and they can tell you the hard things. Yeah.
Vipin, that's something that you kind of brought up when we're talking about this weekend around kind of truthfulness and the necessity to really to cultivate that kind, what John is talking about, that kind of truthfulness within relationships so that it breaks up the patterning of our own assumptions towards each other or the ones we hold that we can't even break up in our own selves, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that just a bit?
Yeah, I mean, so let's just break down what John and Peter Senge and many, many more visionary leaders have always pointed us to, right? This can go all the way back to Gandhi, to Jesus and Buddha, the times of the world. None of this is new.
Yes.
But I just want to break this down for a second just to make sure, it's easy to fall into the trap of saying, oh, Gandhi can do that, or Obama can do that, but I'm just another ordinary person coming to a Sunday mass. Like, I can't be a ruthlessly loving truth teller. But one of the things we are figuring out in the togetherness practice is, if you look at the experience of togetherness, love, connection, friendship, belonging, joy, every single thing which we as human beings deeply crave for, the portal to have that experience is the practice of truthfulness. Truthfulness, so not truth, but truthfulness, the practice of being real, authentic, and sharing what is true for you. But that's hard for people, because we fear that we lose the relationship. We'll fear what he or she might think. The pastor might throw me out of the church if I go and tell him I really did not like what he said on a Sunday mass, blah, 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 the voices in our head. But what we are discovering is, what enables human beings to practice truthfulness with each other is when there is a culture and conditions for trust.
Yes.
But then trust is hard, because we've all had experiences of our trust being broken by people, and it takes a really long time to create it. But what we are discovering is, so togetherness, truthfulness. To enter truthfulness, you need to have the capacities of trusting. But to create a culture of trust, all we have to do is to create spaces for intimacy. Into me you see, as Oprah would say. So if we can create spaces in a church, in a school, in a congregation where human beings are invited to share of their real selves, that creates trust, which gives the permission to be truthful, which then opens up the portal of love, connection, togetherness. That's the thing which we all long for. As Matt, you would say, the second phase of God. The God in the relational space. Yes. The sacred within, the sacred between us, and the sacred around us.
Yes.
So the togetherness practice is intended to be of service to that phase, second phase of God.
Will you maybe riff on this a bit? Because this is the thing that I see. When you're talking about truthfulness, and when I hear you talk about it, it's almost like an affect of like sharing yourself. But I see people in the world today that when they think that they have to be truthful people, it doesn't have anything to do. It doesn't sound like what you're saying. It's more like an intellectual assent, the right belief, the right doctrine, the right statement, the right candidate, that's truth. And so it becomes, for a lot of people, truth is a dogma. It's a dogmatic thing. But when I hear you talk about truthfulness, it sounds more relational.
Yes, beautiful. So that's why I'm making this distinction of saying it's not truthfulness. So it's not a belief system, but it's a constant minute by minute practice of what's real right now for me in this moment, right? And so what it is doing is, it is me bringing forth my real authentic self. And here's what's powerful about that. Think about it. Every single time we've been in a conversation, we are talking about the weather or the last game which we have saw on the weekend, but then someone says something that is real about them, and the whole conversation goes to a deeper level, because there is something within us, in our DNA, which can recognize courage. So truthfulness is the practice of, Brené Brown might say in her language, wholeheartedness. The practice of being my whole, fully authentic relational self here. And I'm sharing that with you because I care for our relationship. I trust that it is okay to bring that in. But it is just so hard in our culture, because like in workplaces, because we don't have the culture of trusting and truthfulness, how it shows up. The shadow side shows up, which is passive-aggressive behavior, or which is like distancing, or the lack of disconnection, which leads to polarization, and where we find ourselves in this election season.
Yeah, that's the distinction you just made, and the question John just asked seems to be the axis or the portal that's crucial because of this. I can beat someone over the head with my truth. Right? Yeah. But truthfulness is the process that breaks me open into a wider field of relationship, both with myself and with others. Right?
Yeah.
And I wonder, like in the world we live in today, we've been hijacked by, I want to put like the truth, that there is one truth that we're all competing for, and you've got it wrong, Vipin, I've got it right, and I'm going to hate you, marginalize you, and push you out until you accept the fact that this is the truth and I hold it.
So let's break that down a minute, right? So when you say a dogma or a belief system, so there is truth. This is the truth, and this is the only truth, and Christ is the only God, or Allah is the only God, or Buddha is the only God, blah, 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 blah. But truthfulness is the practice of saying, this is why it's so important to me. This is my life conditions and what I learned from my parents and my pastor, which makes me believe that I will give my life over to Christ. This is why I care about abortion rights so much, or what it means for me to say all life is precious and abortion should be banned. So you see, we are getting people to go away from the belief system to really talk more about why is that important to you? Why does that animate you? Why do you fight about that? And when you can speak about that, you are connecting the other person to what they care about. And then there is connection instead of disconnection.
Yeah. The problem with that is it makes me hate people less if I move towards truthfulness, you know?
Well, but I think there's also a problem in our society. Like I was watching, Jeff, I don't know if you, because you're young and you're a man, and so you probably keep up with this stuff. But you know there's this whole culture now, and it's even come out in some of the political stuff. It's this masculinity, youth, bro culture thing. You know what I'm talking about? So I saw... Joe Rogan. Like my wife better not go vote for whoever I tell. All this kind of stuff. But there was some guy, and there was a clip of a podcast, and I don't remember who it was. I wish I could. But there was a clip, and he said something like, you know, if I had a friend, a guy who came into my house and sat on my couch with a beer and said, "So, man, how are you doing? How are you? How are things going on in your life?" He said, I would just tell him to shut up. You know, he can talk about the game or whatever else, but I don't be talking about all those feelings and stuff. It's like, this is like a thing, like for young men. It seems like that's the opposite of like self-enlightenment or actualization or fulfillment or any of these things that we're talking about. I mean, do you know, am I just like, I just saw one off thing, or is that kind of a thing?
I think there is like a subset culture that exists right now around that. But I'm not in those circles, but I do see that existing in different social spaces. Yeah.
I mean, if you were in that circle, I would still love you. I just don't, but I do think it's a thing, and it's even in the demographics, you know, they're showing that young men are feeling disenfranchised, not just from politics, but from like parts of life. Mm-hmm. And there's something going on there, and I don't know what that is, but there is this masculinity kind of fight going on about what's real masculinity versus what's toxic masculinity versus what's you're too feminine, or you know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't know where all that comes from, but when you talk about truthfulness, I'm thinking, when I look at some of these young men, thinking those are the relationships you really need to be able to open yourself up. And like you said, truthfulness, that's what leads you to transformation. Yeah. But there seems to be something going on in our society that's not opening the door to certain segments of the things that you're talking about, togetherness. It's almost like they're moving away from those things.
Yeah, and it doesn't help to have social media, which is amplifying the worst in us and not just the best in us, right? So, which is why I think it is critical to have spaces like The Crossing. I remember one lady who I met her, she said, you know, in a big church, I feel at home here. And that's what I think is important for these young men, John, you're pointing to surround them with people who can hold them in love, but who can also challenge some of those belief systems. And I also want to say that this is also a part of natural growing up. I can remember all the times when I was 18 and 24 where I've been a complete asshole. You know, I've grown out of it by some grace and by a lot of spirit. Right, I'm guessing I'm not the only one, hopefully. But it's just but not to vilify them, but to acknowledge, and that's why we need elders.
Yes.
You know, the intergenerational, one of the things which challenges, at least for me, what is challenging is the absence of religious space or the decline of congregational spaces in the US is it's one of those few places where intergenerations of people can come together to learn and talk and connect and disagree. So that sense of authentic community where I can be myself, but I can also be challenged, I can also grow, and to have healthy models of masculine. That's the other problem. Where are the examples of healthy masculine besides, the rare instance of a really good movie that might come out of a Hollywood or a good book? We don't have that. All the stories of the masculine which we get to amplify in the media is our unhealthy, pathological, adolescent masculine energy. And to also balance that out to say what are the examples of the healthy feminine. So I don't think it's just a male problem. I don't think it's a gender problem at all. I just think it's energy.
Yeah. And I think you're right. And you and I've talked about this at other places, that there's really no process or rites of passage within places like the church, or places like, we've relied on older models that did form, and they hold now kind of a structure of information, but not a rite of passage where the church and the whole community comes around in a meaningful way. Confirmation used to be like this. It's not like this anymore. That's deeply forming around identity. Or we don't know what to do after confirmation, actually, a lot of times. We hope that folks get plugged in, but we don't say, oh, this is a step along the way of this process that you're going to be taking on, what it means to be a full human being in relationship with your elders.
And what does it look like, instead of forcing every kid to go into Sunday Bible classes, to ask young people what would it look like to design authentic experiences where they can bring their doubts and their faith about Jesus in church settings, in temples and mosques, to engage them in their emergent spirituality. There is data science that's now saying is the place in our brain where depression hits is also the place where spiritual awakening hits. That's the whole studies around the awakened brain. I had a copy of the book here. But that's fascinating, right? So look at teenage depression and teenage isolation that's happening as a crisis, a mental health crisis. Is there a way religion and spirituality can rise up to meet those needs? Because these are deep longings of the human soul which, not getting held in a proper loving container, goes into pathology and expresses itself as some of the worst in us. And again, it doesn't help with social media around. So may I just say, in the practice of truthfulness, so I always don't talk about eating the mango, but eat the mango. So the practice of truthfulness is, I didn't realize, I thought we were 30 minutes, so do have a call I need to go to. But I just wanted to check in with both of you to see if there is a way we can land it, or I'm sure.
Why don't you land it with the mango?
John, you tempt me with the mango, I can't resist it. Yeah.
Or give us a practice, give us a mindfulness kind of way of thinking about processing all this as we go out.
Yeah. What comes up for me is, here's a practice. Find someone in your life whom you care about, right? And ask them a simple question. Ask them a question like, what's their favorite way of receiving love? What's their favorite way of receiving love? And be open yourself to see what might come through them. It could be your child. It could be your partner whom you've been married for 40 years. It could be your colleague. Just to have that human-to-human connection, to say, take a breath and saying, you know what, I listened to this pod have mercy thing, and there was this guy who was talking about connection and a mango, and this was what he said when John asked him about mango. He asked this question, what's your favorite way of receiving love? And get an opportunity to share your own experience. And what that does, it just creates human connection. Mm-hmm. It just becomes a place where Christ consciousness can show up between human beings. It becomes a portal or a mirror for you to see your shared humanity, because love is common and we all long and yearn for it, but we forget because of all these distractions which we have.
Thank you.
That's what comes up.
Thank you, Vipin. You're such a gift. We love you.
Yeah, thanks for being with us. and sharing your
Thank you.
time.
Yeah.
We appreciate
Wow.
you.
Talk to you soon, brother.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
So,
I have
Matt,
a question, John.
I have a question for you.
It just came up
It just
spontaneously in my life.
I was thinking the same thing.
So what's your favorite way of receiving love?
You know what I think about moments or flashes for us? It's like when family is together. It happens a lot for us around meals or, moments like those. Typically a meal or something where something authentic can happen. And for us, I guess it's meals because that's like one of the few times everybody's like sits down and all together and looks at each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think the way that I'm wired has always been just because of my own background and everything. I tend to create boundaries and barriers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've found as I get older that, I'm trying to stop more and open the door more to real relationships and those moments when they just show up and you don't control them. They just happen. You're really good at that. I mean, I know I just watch you. I mean, I remember when I tell the story when Adam Hamilton was here and we were walking between services and we were running late and somebody came up and said, "Oh, John, I've got this surgery on Wednesday. Will you pray for me?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. I will certainly pray for you on Wednesday." And Adam's like, "Well, let's pray now." And in my mind, I'm going, "No, we're late to the service. We have somewhere to be." But those are the things that I look at, and I have a great appreciation for it. And I need to do that more. Finding those little moments.
Yeah, that's good.
Right?
That's
where you can just
really
stop and be loved and give love.
Wow.
How about you?
I was going to say the exact same thing. Me too. This is really weird when he was talking, asking that question. The thing that came up for me was, I was like, particularly with Michelle, is that like, I love it when she like holds my hand, and I love it when she like, she'll play with the. Like she'll
All right, hold
scratch
on.
the back of my head.
Okay. That's
No,
enough.
that I'm just saying. I think I receive love in like connection like that, right? Like, and those moments. Maybe it goes back to those moments. Like I don't know if we'll cut this out of the podcast or not.
No, just.
But I feel like over the last couple of years, you and I have I've watched us cultivate those moments here. I've watched you cultivate those moments with other folks on staff, and I think it's made a massive difference. Right? Mm-hmm. And I think we can have 1,000 different consultants come in and tell us the road forward. But I think the thing that's made the most difference is the cultivation of those relationships. And so I think, that's what gives me great hope and why
when he asked the question, like how about how do you experience love, or how did he frame it exactly? Like how you receive love. I just thought of the love languages.
Yeah.
The book, the 5 love languages.
Yeah.
And I mean, from what you described, there's like, was it physical touch?
Yes. Yeah. Physical touch.
It is one of the 5. Mine's acts of service. Oh. And it's the way they write it, it's horrible. If your love language is acts of service, you value when your partner goes out of their way to make your life easier. That sounds horrible.
But it's true, right?
It's
but
true.
Not in a like you're here to serve me, but you're like,
but when
you
they
experience care that way.
No, but that's like the worst love language to have.
No,
I have the worst one.
Gifts is worse.
Yeah, that's true.
All you have to
gifts
do,
and acts of service. Like, I like it when you get me something. What did you get me today?
But I'm saying all you have to do for me is buy me a dog, and that's it's a wrap. That's funny. That's funny. You know what I was thinking too, that tonight, I wonder what it'd be like or even this weekend to make a mess of cookies and go hand them out at my neighbors. Like the actual people around me that have different types of signs in their front yard that to be what did Jesus talk about, that giving a cup of cold water, right? And that does something, that creates a different narrative, and it might be that easy. it might be.
I'm just hoping I think that's a great idea. I think to do something for your neighbors and to wherever they are. I just kind of am hoping that and maybe it's just our context, and because there's been sort of a shakeup of people selecting their own environment, like in the last since 2000.
Yeah.
So some folks have left this church, and some folks have come to this church, and it's like. So there's like people are selecting their spots, but one of the things that does is it kind of makes it a little bit more peaceful in each of those spots. I don't know if that's a great thing or what, but I also get the sense that even people who have moved to different spaces, it seems like it's not as toxic as it was 4 years ago or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just my own experience. I'm sure, plus don't pay much attention to the social media stuff anymore. I have more hidden or blocked.
Well, plus you've been
things.
beat so hard that you have a good callus built up.
Well,
I think also
but like somebody asked me today, today, as people listen to this, make sure you like, subscribe. That's a good comment. Share with a friend. Today is election day. As we're recording this, it'll be out, Friday. But 2 people on staff after our staff meeting said, "Have you had a lot of people coming to you about the election? Are they concerned about the?" I said, "No, I haven't had.
No.
I haven't had anyone."
Yeah.
And I had a great input from, a member of our church that said, it'd be really good is to hear something from our church, how we can be in prayer and how we can, look at this and frame the day. And so we sent that out early this morning, and a lot of people were very appreciative.
It was great
of that.
You sent that out
just to kind of say, hey, it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Just pray for the process.
So for those that are just listening, like you sent an email out that basically kind of summoned people to pray and to hold this day and the days forward in a different posture, to place our anxiety in there, to pray for the folks around the country and also for our communities. And I thought, man, that's...
Yeah, it's just, on what we've been talking about in the sense is like on the temporal side, when we mean temporal, we mean things of this world, right? There's winners and losers. This election means that half of people are going to win and half of people are going to feel like they lose. That's temporal stuff. That's not eternal stuff. That stuff actually they'll get over it in 2 years when there's another election, right? Or 4 years when they have another election. They get over that stuff pretty quick. And some people don't, but it really shouldn't be something that drastically affects like how we live our life, how we live our life of faith, how we live our life of togetherness in these relationships like he was talking about. I mean, it ought to make us have a higher value on those things.
Yeah. Because
of just the category. I think because we've been through so much, I think a lot of Americans, not everybody, but a lot of people that I know, especially people of deep, authentic faith, are really putting this stuff in the place where it is, in the space where it needs to be.
Yes.
It's important. I'm going to vote. I'm going to speak. I'm going to, do mercy and love justice and all this kind of stuff. But that is not going to be my joy or happiness is not determined on the result of this election. There's more that's the spiritual formation.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to give people some language to say, we want to be a church, and I think we should do this more often on significant things. We want to be a church that gives you some resources to navigate, like at Christmas with your family. How can you move through this season and you be a spiritual leader as a husband or a mother or a father or whatever, I think if we have these little nuggets to just equip people, that would be a real helpful tool. All right. Well, as we draw closer to the holidays, we'll try to have a couple of episodes specifically geared for that. And then we'll probably take a break last couple of weeks of the year, or maybe the first week or so, and then come back rip-roaring ready to go. All right. Well, hey, we got to stop. I'm John Stevens.
I'm Matt Russell.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.